The lockdown being denied by Albany, I think, was a huge factor in this entire story.
And is that a real problem for corrections officers, that so many decisions are made out of Albany and not left to the superintendent and the people running the facility?
I mean, I think so, and definitely from the officers I've spoken to, it seems like back in the day, when they were called wardens, they kind of had more control over the facility. They could make their own decisions. They didn't need to get approval on things. And in an environment like that, sometimes you have to act very quickly. And even having to wait and get approval from Albany seems to be a little, counterproductive at times. And, not being able to act in a speedy way could have effects like it did on this one.
And is the feeling that at times it puts the corrections officers in danger?
Oh, absolutely.
The inaction by Albany?
I mean, yeah, the officers are the ones interacting with these inmates every day. They're the ones dealing with these things. And so, there's been a lot of policy changes, especially since the escape. There's been a lot more rights given to inmates. And it's making it harder and harder for the officers to do their jobs. It's very easy for an inmate to file a grievance, even during night cell checks. Officers aren't really allowed to shine bright flashlights into the cells because if they wake up an inmate, there can be a grievance filed against them. If they shake a bed and an inmate's saying, "You woke me up, I'm filing a grievance," and they have all these, inmate rights groups and organizations that are fighting for them. And all these things are making the job more dangerous, more difficult for the officers, and really harder for the facility to really keep everything in check.
I think a lot of people would have thought immediately after the escape that there would have been a real crackdown on things like that. But you're saying that in many cases, a number of the corrections officers now feel that it's worse than it was leading up to and during the escape?
From a lot of the ones I've spoken to, it seems like things are getting progressively worse. I mean, I had even heard that when this all came out, people were hearing these 2 convicted murderers were on the quote unquote honor block, and people are like, how are these guys even able to be part of something like that? Like, these guys are bad people. They may have gone 9 months without an infraction, but that doesn't negate the crimes they committed to get in there in the first place. And so there was a lot of backlash about that, and Albany in the beginning made it sound like honor block was gonna go away. This wasn't going to happen. A block is gone. And it's true, A block is gone. A block is no longer the honor block, but honor block still exists at Clinton Correctional. I don't know if a lot of people know that. C block is now the honor block, and it's basically run the same way that A block always used to be run prior to the escape. And a lot of people, I think need to be aware of that, to know things haven't changed much, and if anything, the policies against the officers have made things a lot worse. Officers are now required to bring in clear plastic lunch bags. They're being scrutinized every day, and inmates are now getting free tablets from the state. There's lots of things happening that are just, in my mind and in the mind of security staff, are definitely making things harder and more dangerous every day.
The corrections officers, what's their thought on Joyce Mitchell's role in this? Do they think that she should have been more severely punished, faced stiffer charges and more prison time?
I mean, I think almost anybody in the community feels that way. I think she was sentenced, to a maximum of 7 years.
7 years, yeah.
Which, from what I've heard, she may be released next month.
That's right.
And it's pretty scary. That's just a little over half of her sentence, and now she's going to be back out, and obviously isn't going to be able to work in that type of environment anymore. But I think most people, especially the officers, feel like she should have been punished much more severely for this, and they really should have made an example out of her.
Along with the retired COs, you had Major Chuck Guess, who was the commander of the search, the manhunt, and Sergeant Jay Cook, who's now retired, New York State Police Sergeant, who was the police officer, the trooper who brought down David Sweat as he was getting close to the Canadian border. And again, Jay Cook has been very reluctant to do any interviews. He did one, I think, with the Press Republican shortly after. Was that difficult to get him to tell his story for your documentary?
Very difficult. Jay is a great man, very humble man. I had a friend, a mutual friend of Jay's, actually put me in touch with him, and Jay agreed to speak with me off the record. He didn't want to be on camera, didn't want to be recorded. I went to his house and we started talking to him, and we're writing notes in a notepad, and he wanted to realize that this story was being told properly. So he agreed to let us audio record the interview. And again, the voice was not supposed to be used in the film. It was just supposed to be for notes. We basically thought, unfortunately, we were going to have to get a voiceover actor to read kind of his words, tell his story. And we always kind of kept his interview in there as a placeholder. And I knew, it felt authentic. It felt like it needed to stay there. And so I kept it in there, and I reached out to him several more times over the next couple of years as I was working on this and said, "Hey Jay, just wondering, have you changed your mind at all? Would you consider letting me keep this in there?" And he's like, no, I'd prefer not. And I kept wondering how I'm going to make this section of the project work, because obviously his story is a huge part of this story. And when we finally finished the film, I sent him over the final copy, and I said, "Jay, this is still in there just as a placeholder, but I'm wondering, would you give your consent to let us keep this in there?" And Jay saw the film and really appreciated the perspective that we gave to not only corrections but to law enforcement in general. And something I learned about Jay through this is Jay actually started his career in corrections, which a lot of people don't know. Jay, I believe, worked in corrections for about 3 years before joining the state police. So he kind of knew both sides of the story, and again, had a respect for what I was doing, had seen these other projects, knew that this was giving a better perspective on the community, on law enforcement, on corrections in general. And Jay finally agreed to let me keep it in. And I really think it made the project so much stronger, so much more authentic. I don't think it would have ever been the same having somebody else read those words. So I'm very grateful to him that he let us do that.
And to hear in his own words describe in great detail what happened, just added so much to the story that we had heard up to this point.
I mean, it gave me goosebumps. When I was sitting there with him the first time, and I went back to California on after that trip, and must have listened to that interview a good dozen times, and every time kept getting goosebumps. I was like, this is so powerful, just hearing these words. Like, nobody else can tell this story like this. And so, I knew we had to figure out a way to get it in there, and luckily we did. And when we finally were able to premiere the film this past weekend, Jay was actually part of the Q&A panel, which was really exciting. A lot of people up here have never seen him in person, heard him talk about some of these things, and it was really cool to sit next to him on that Q&A panel and, again, hear him speak about those events.